welcome back to a new Simple Sunday video. This time I'm doing a very clean and simple card with just a colored image, and I'm keeping the decorations to a minimal this time. And the card I'm making is the one you can see here, so as usual, if you want to see how it's done, then just keep on watching. And I'm starting with a dark blue card base and a sheet of distressed watercolor paper. And since I'm using this paper, I presume you can guess what kind of coloring I'm about to do. But before we get to that, I'm going to stamp my image. And I'm using this cute goat from Whiff of Joy. And this stamp is still unmounted, and I don't really have the energy to go ahead and mount it right now. So I'm just going to add some adhesive to the back of the rubber and temporarily adhere it to my acrylic block. And since I'm completely worthless at the whole stamping thing, I have bought myself one of these stamping mats that actually works pretty well. And it enables me to get an even and crisp impressions when I stamp. And it's especially good when using unmounted stamps like the one I'm using here. And I'm just stamping my image in black archival ink since it's waterproof, which is a good thing when you're going to use a lot of water. And my watercolor paper is a bit too wide for my card base, so here I'm just trying to quickly measure where I need to stamp my image. I could have trimmed the watercolor paper before I stamped the image, but if I had done that, I would have to make sure to really line up my image in the center of the paper. And from experience, I already know that lining up things and stamping straight isn't really one of my strongest attributes, so instead I'm going to trim the paper after I stamp the image so I can make sure that I get it where I want it. But before we get to the trimming part, I'm going to finish the coloring. And I'm using my distress ink pads for this, and also a clean acrylic block. And then I just press down the ink pad onto the block to transfer some of the color, and I also use my mister bottle to spray some water onto the block. And now I can easily mix the water and the ink to get different shades and colors that I want. And since this coloring thing will take a while, I'm going to speed up the process quite a bit here and add some music. And when the coloring is done and the ink has dried, I'm going to add a little bit of bling to the berries on top of the cupcakes. And I'm using my red Wink of Stella marker for this. And I never used this marker before, and as you can see here, I did have some problems getting the ink out. And I didn't realize that I had forgotten to remove the protective cap on the inside of the pen, so it did take me a while to realize why the ink didn't want to come out. But after I removed the cap, the ink came out just as it should, and I just got the pen started a bit on a piece of scrap paper that I had on my desk. And then I added the red to the berries, and I guess you could say that I went through a whole lot of trouble for those 3 tiny dots of red on there, but at least they are there now. And I also realized that the goat was kind of just floating around in the middle of the paper here, so I needed to ground it somehow. So I quickly sprayed some water onto my craft mat and added some more gray ink to the card to get some shadow below the goat. And this way it looks more like he's actually standing on something rather than just flying around. And then I'm trimming the watercolor paper to the right size, trying to get the goat somewhat centered. And since I'm using an A6 card base, it is slightly taller than the watercolor paper, and therefore I only need to trim the sides of the paper to get an even border around it when I adhere it. And of course I do need a sentiment on the card as well, and this set from Whiff of Joy had a stamp that said cupcakes and kisses, and since this cute little goat is carrying a basket of cupcakes, I thought this sentiment would fit perfectly. And to make sure that I get this sentiment where I want it to be, I'm using my stamp positioner as usual. And I'm also using the stamp mat here to make sure that I get an even impression when I stamp. Using the stamp positioner is a really easy and fast way to line up wood and cling mounted stamps. And then when everything is done on the panel, I'm using foam squares to adhere it to my card base. I chose to use foam squares mostly because watercolor paper tend to bend a bit when you're using a lot of water, and it can be hard to get them to stick to the card base when using regular adhesive. And that was my card for today. It may not be a very fast card to make since you have to color the image, but it's still a clean and simple card, and sometimes I like to make cards like this. So I hope you liked it, and I will be back next week with a new art journal video. So until then, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you again next time.